The surprising and unexpected science of the cross. Part 2, we're going to look at the science that we've gathered from looking at thousands of punches, breaking down the common denominators, and finding a formula for an effective cross punch. We are going to break down the cross step by step and look at each mechanic in detail. We're going to learn some surprising things along the way. One of them being that the rear foot is never positioned as it is traditionally taught. We do not even have one single example of the rear foot being positioned like this. We will also see that even the straightest punches aren't as straight as we assume them to be. And that even the most technically sound and crisp punches still adhere to these principles which are often counterintuitive. We are going to discuss one very important lesson we can learn from traditional karate when it comes to punching mechanics, and the single most effective cue we need to make our cross correct. I will refer to punches that look like this as crosses, and ones that look like this as overhands. Again, look at the overhand, look at the wide arc. Some punches can be difficult to categorize exactly whether they are crosses or overhands, and that is beyond the point of this discussion and becomes a matter of semantics. However, what we do see is that they follow similar mechanics. With that said, the body mechanics are similar, but that will be the topic for another video. Let's begin our breakdown by now looking at the cross step by step.
To begin our breakdown, we're going to look at this great example of a right cross leading to a knockout. The first mechanic is lead hand setup or lead hand action. Here, the lead hand is acting as a measure. This serves not only to gauge distance, but also to load the rear hand. The next step we see is the hand or the arm exchange. As the left arm draws back, the right arm projects forward. The action of the opposite arm is vital in throwing a punch. The next step is the side bend. This is perhaps the most important mechanic in the cross. It creates rotational power and aligns the head over the lead leg for 1 foot balance. The next step is that the hand and arm continue to rotate and the pinky faces up. The punch travels towards the opposite hip. Depending on the degree of follow through determines how close the fist actually becomes to the opposite hip. Finally, the rear leg draws forward. There's varying degrees of how far the rear leg will come forward, but in almost all punches the rear leg will travel forward. Let's take another look at this example, keeping these principles in mind. Lead hand action, jab or measure, arm exchange, pushing off the rear foot, side bend, head over lead leg, punch travels down, and back to stance. Again, measure, hand exchange, pushing off the rear foot, side bend, head over lead leg, punch travels down, weight comes forward. Notice Dorticos set up this punch with his lead hand extended out. The arms then exchange position, the left arm drawing back, which helps to project the right arm or punching arm forward. Pushing off the rear foot from the area underneath the big toe, which is going to push the weight forward and sideways, head over lead leg. As we see here, the head is off center line, courtesy of the push off from the rear leg. The rear foot is now light, and all of the weight is on the front foot. Lateral flexion or side bend, which creates rotational power and also positions the head over the lead leg, drawing the weight forward and allowing balance on 1 foot. The rear foot is in the air due to the weight being on the front foot. This brings more mass and ultimately more power into the punch. And ultimately the rear foot draws forward to help recover stance.
Let's see it live again. Now let's take a look at each mechanic in depth. The first thing we see in a good cross is typically lead hand setup or lead hand action. This could be a jab, or this could be the lead hand being used to measure distance. This not only acts as setup, but it also acts to twist the shoulders and load the rear arm for a more powerful and effective punch. Here's a great example of lead hand action with Ray Mercer setting up a knockout cross with measuring distance first with his left hand. Notice how the lead hand not only measures distance but also serves to load up the rear hand. We typically see lead hand setup or action before every good cross that lands. There are some exceptions, and those typically involve counter punches where the lead hand does not directly precede the cross. In this example, we see Errol Zimmerman doing an upward slapping hook to set up his rear hand. Notice how the lead hand creates a distraction, measures distance, and helps to load the shoulders for a very powerful punch. In this example, we're going to look how Anthony Joshua uses a 3/4 jab or fake to land his right cross. We see him starting here in a chambered position. He then throws a jabbing type motion out about 3/4 of the way, which also serves as a fake and gets Andy to bring his hands up. He now begins to bring his right arm crossing over the top of Andy's guard to land a punch. But notice how this is not only a setup, but the lead hand being forward and then drawing back is going to add power to the punch. You see the cross land very effectively.
Solid right hand, and that's what caused the cut. That's also a fast, long range right.
Let's look at some examples without lead hand action. Again, these usually come in the way of counter punches. Here we see Mike Tyson slipping in, creating angles, which enables him to land a very powerful cross without needing his lead hand to set it up.
Okay, and here's the knockout.
I'm trying to keep my hands up. I'm moving. I'm trying to get to the side and look for the opening. I see it.
Here it is.
Boom. Straight. Boom. Just like the one Freddie.
The next mechanic is referred to as the hand exchange. The arms are acting in reciprocal fashion. As the left arm is drawing back, it is assisting the right arm in drawing forward. This is typically seen in all human movements. If there's movement on one side of the body, there is typically an opposite movement on the other side. The punching mechanics of traditional karate perfectly illustrate and emphasize this principle. Notice the reciprocal action of the arms. Let's look at the same example again with Ray Mercer. He has the left arm extended and the right arm is loaded back here. Now the rear arm begins to move forward, which is being assisted by the lead arm pulling back. These are working in a reciprocal fashion. We see the rear arm continuing to drive forward as the left arm pulls back, again working in a reciprocal fashion. As we see here, the left arm is still pulling back even after the punch has landed.
Ladies and gentlemen, the official time. Referee Sean Curtin reaches the count of 10 at 1 minute.
And rips the left hook upstairs.
We see some form of hand exchange in all punches, even the ones that are not knockouts, as exampled here. Here we see Floyd Mayweather extending his lead arm to paw and measure distance. Here you see the lead arm dropping and starting to pull backward before the rear hand is even moving. So the punch is being initiated from the opposite arm. Look at how far the lead arm has traveled backwards before the rear hand is even launched off the chest and shoulder area. The lead side continues to draw back as the rear hand continues to travel forward. The elbow is tucked in at the hip as the punch is completed. The hand exchange is still present in punches that don't involve a lead hand setup as well, although the action may be more subtle. Here we see Virgil Ortiz in a good stance. Notice now the position of his left arm. His opponent throws out a jab. Virgil not only propels his right arm forward for the cross, but his left arm drops and pulls back, acting in a reciprocal fashion to the punching arm. The punch extends out, hitting its target as the opposite arm continues to draw back, again acting in a reciprocal fashion. Another look from this angle, notice that you can't really see his elbow right now. His opponent shoots the jab out. As Virgil's counter right shoots out, his left elbow pulls back, acting in a reciprocal fashion. Happening concurrently with the arm exchange is the push-off phase, where the weight is pushed from the rear foot, usually angled around 45 degrees. The weight is pushed from the area around the first metatarsal or under the big toe. The weight is then pushed forward and to the side, and in the next phase we'll see the side bend occurring. Notice how this punch is initiated by Dorticos pushing off the rear foot. Notice the position and angle of the feet in these examples as well. Here's a great example with Bronco Sikatic. Notice his rear leg is still turned out and the inside of the foot is driving into the mat. Again, notice the position of the rear foot and that it is not turned in. It's pushing off the inside part of the rear foot. And his foot does not come into the air in this example because it is a shorter punch, but definitely effective. Again, the rear foot initiates the punch from an angle around 45 to 90 degrees. It is definitely not parallel with the front foot. It's pushing off the area underneath the big toe. In this example, as it is traditionally taught, the feet are parallel with each other and the weight is on the ball of the foot, pushing off from the ball of the foot with the weight equally distributed. And to reiterate, I have not found one single example of the feet being positioned like this during a cross. Notice again the difference in foot actions, digging the rear foot in and feet being parallel as opposed to pushing off from an angled foot and the foot coming into the air. Again, the degree of the foot coming into the air depends on follow through. As the punch continues, all of the weight is transferred to the front foot. A side bend occurs and the head moves over the lead leg, enabling balance on one foot, and that is the lead leg. Giorgio Petrosian, loading up for the cross. We see the rear foot is usually angled between 90 and 45 degrees, somewhere between there. And now we see Petrosian pushing his weight forward into the side on an angled foot by pushing off the area under the big toe or around the first metatarsal. We see now that the majority of his body weight was pushed onto his lead foot, and the rear foot is very light and it's going to begin to travel forward. The rear foot now is traveling forward, all of the weight is on the front foot, and the head is aligned over the lead leg, and there is a side bend occurring. The rear leg has traveled forward, it is much closer to the lead leg, and again we see one foot at balance, head over the lead leg.
A home for that left hand. Look at him, just right through the guard.
We see Conor McGregor starting to push off the inside part of his rear foot. It's the area under the big toe. In this next frame, we see that after the weight was pushed from the area under the big toe, all of the weight is pushed off the rear foot and onto the lead foot. As you see here, his toes are dragging just on the mat surface, so all of the weight is on the front foot. We see as the punch continued, the rear foot traveled forward, closer to the lead leg. And we see Conor McGregor is showing a good side bend, short side, long side, and his head is over his lead leg, showing 1 foot balance. As the punch reaches full extension, the pinky is often turned up. The opposite elbow tucks back towards the waist. All of the weight is on the front foot. The rear foot is typically in the air. It often draws forward. Here's an excellent example of Takashi Miura turning his pinky up to finish this punch. Look at how the pinky turns up and it twists the arm for a very powerful finish. We see Takashi starting with lead hand action to set up his cross. And now we see the hand exchange. Now notice the position of the fist as the punch lands. And now notice the pinky being up as the punch reaches completion. An excellent example with Jerome LeBanner. Look at how the pinky turns up as the punch is landing. In this example, Rico Verhoeven turning his pinky up as the punch is landing. The punch continues to travel down towards the opposite hip. And then good stance is recovered. In this example, look at how this very crisp and technically sound cross travels downwards towards the opposite hip. It's not as straight as you think. The punch travels out and curving down towards the opposite hip and then draws back to the face. We see another jab after that. Frame by frame, we see the lead hand action, the arm exchange. Very straight punch, but watch how it hooks and travels down before it comes back to stance. Let's look at some more examples of the punch traveling downward. In order to balance on one foot, you have to have your head and your supporting leg in alignment. Balancing on one foot is impossible if your head is on center line or not over a supporting leg. If there is sufficient side bend, the head is off center line and it is over the supporting leg, it means there is balance on one foot. The rear foot is virtually weightless and it is able to travel forward and rotate freely. Let's look at this example again to illustrate all the principles. First, we have lead hand action as a setup. Next is the hand exchange. The punch lands. The pinky turns up as the punch reaches completion. And we see that the punch has traveled down and Takashi is leaning, showing balance on one leg, which is the lead leg. Now we look at the rear angle to clearly illustrate the side bend and the head being over the lead leg, all the weight being on the lead leg. Let's look at this example again with Dortikosh showing all the mechanics that we talked about. First we see lead hand action or measure, the hand exchange, pushing off the rear foot, the side bend. Look at the angle of the side bend. The rear foot is in the air and then the rear foot draws forward. Let's look at this example again with Rico Verhoeven to show that even the most crisp and technical of punches still follow these mechanics. Also notice how Rico paused his opponent's jab down to set up his cross.
Exchange.
Although this clip looks identical, it is not, but it's the exact same setup.
Right hand lead into left kick. I love it. Oh, big shot.
Let's take a closer look at this example frame by frame. Not only does it show all the mechanics we've been talking about, it illustrates how even the most crisp and technically sound crosses follow these mechanics. We see both fighters facing each other. Fighter in white throws out a jab, which Rico paws down with his lead hand. As you can see, he's already starting to side bend. He's already bringing his head over his lead leg. The side bend is continuing, head coming over the lead leg, as his lead hand is pulling his opponent's jab down. The arms are exchanging positions, the left arm pulling back as the right arm is projecting forward. The elbow draws back further. As we see here, there is a side bend and the head is over the lead leg and the punch is about to land. We see that the punch is traveling down and towards the opposite hip. However, it is quickly retracted and brought back to guard in the next clip. And just as quickly as it went out, the punch is coming back to guard and the opponent's still trying to figure out what just happened. This brings me to my final and most important point. Most of us that have sparred enough or that are naturally athletic probably already punch like this innately. even though we're not aware of it. However, by better understanding how things are really performed, we can make our training more effective, and this will give us a greater carryover into sparring, into live competition, or into self-defense. Furthermore, we owe it to our students and our training partners, those in the general population, the ones that might not ever spar, the ones that are training for fitness and for recreation, for a little bit of self-defense, to give them the most effective teaching, the most realistic teaching techniques and mechanics that we can. Thank you for watching. Please stay tuned. There'll be many more videos coming.
Is that good?